Hey everyone, welcome to Midnight Mystic Stories. I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow and helps us keep bringing more of the content you love. And be sure to comment below where you are tuning in from. Thank you and enjoy the video. It started with a damn dating app algorithm, a perfectly curated profile, and a series of late-night texts that felt too good to be true. I mean, isn't that how all these stories start? With a promise, a spark, the tantalizing possibility of something real in a world of fleeting connections. I was recently divorced, raw, and clinging to the hope that I could find someone who saw me for who I was, flaws and all. I was vulnerable, and that's probably why I fell so hard, so fast. His name was Liam, and his profile was effortlessly cool. Photos of him hiking in the mountains, playing guitar by a campfire, and laughing with friends at a brewery. He was an architect, creative, outdoorsy, basically everything my ex wasn't. Our first few dates were like something out of a movie montage. We hiked to scenic overlooks, shared pizza under the stars, and talked for hours about everything and nothing. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, asking about my passions, my fears, my dreams. He listened intently, making eye contact, and offering thoughtful responses that made me feel seen and understood. He had a calming presence, a way of making me feel safe and secure. After the chaos of my divorce, that's exactly what I needed. He was my rock, my confidant, the person I could always turn to for a listening ear or a comforting hug. I let myself fall, letting go of all the walls I had built up around my heart. Things started to shift subtly, almost imperceptibly. At first, it was just little things. He'd cancel plans last minute, claiming he was swamped with work. He'd become less responsive to my texts, taking hours, sometimes days, to reply. I chalked it up to him being busy, stressed, or just needing space. I didn't want to be clingy or demanding, so I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. But then came the other women. It started with a mutual friend who vaguely asked if I had met his friend Sarah. I replied with confusion, as I had not, and had no clue who this woman was. Liam hadn't mentioned anyone named Sarah. When I asked him about it, he brushed it off, saying she was just a co-worker he occasionally grabbed coffee with. I tried to let it go, but a seed of doubt had been planted in my mind. I began to notice other friends in his social media, commenting on his posts, liking his photos, leaving vague, flirty messages. Each time, he had a perfectly reasonable explanation, a plausible excuse. They were just friends, co-workers, acquaintances. I wanted to believe him, but the doubt kept gnawing at me. I was slowly losing my mind. Then came the disappearing acts. He'd vanish for days, sometimes weeks, without a word. I'd text, call, leave voicemails, but he wouldn't respond. I'd lie awake at night, wondering if something had happened to him, if he was hurt, if he was even alive. And then, just as suddenly, he'd reappear, acting as if nothing had happened. He'd apologize profusely, saying he'd been dealing with a family emergency or a work crisis. He'd shower me with affection, promising to make it up to me. And like a fool, I'd forgive him, wanting so badly to believe that he was the person I thought he was. The cycle continued, becoming more frequent and more intense. The disappearances grew longer, the excuses more elaborate, the affection more performative. I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next shoe to drop. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, afraid to say or do anything that might trigger another vanishing act. But despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to leave. I was addicted to the highs, the moments when he made me feel loved and cherished. I was holding on to the hope that he would change, that he would become the person I thought he was. The turning point came during what was supposed to be a romantic getaway. We had planned the trip for months, a weekend escape to a cozy cabin in the mountains. I was so excited to spend quality time with him, to reconnect, to rekindle the spark that had been fading. But the trip was a disaster from the start. He was distant, preoccupied, constantly checking his phone. He barely spoke to me. And when he did, it was with a forced politeness that felt colder than indifference. One night, after a tense dinner, I found him outside on the porch, talking on the phone in a hushed voice. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could sense the urgency in his tone. When he saw me, he quickly ended the call and turned away, his face flushed. I asked him who he was talking to, but he refused to answer, brushing me off with a curt, "It's none of your business." That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I was done with the lies, the disappearances, the other women. I was done with the constant uncertainty and the emotional roller coaster. "Who was that, Liam?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It doesn't matter," he said, avoiding my gaze. "Yes, it does. I deserve to know. I deserve the truth." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It was just a friend," he said, his voice flat. "A friend? Is that what you call all the women you disappear for?" He didn't answer. I could see the guilt in his eyes, the truth he was trying to hide. "I'm done," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm done with this. I can't do this anymore." I packed my bags and left the cabin in the middle of the night, calling a taxi to take me back to the city. I felt numb, empty, like a part of me had died. It's been several months since then, and I'm still trying to make sense of what happened. I've gone through periods of anger, sadness, and confusion. I've questioned my judgment, my worth, my ability to trust. I've wondered if I imagined it all, if I misinterpreted his actions, if I was just too needy or insecure. But deep down, I know the truth. He wasn't who I thought he was. He was a master manipulator, a skilled liar, a heartbreaker who preyed on my vulnerability. I'm still healing, still learning to trust myself again. I've started therapy, and it's helping me process my emotions and understand the patterns that led me to him. I'm slowly rebuilding my life, focusing on my passions, my friends, and my own well-being. I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to fully trust someone again, but I'm open to the possibility. I refuse to let this experience define me or prevent me from finding happiness in the future. The hardest part is the lingering questions. Why did he do it? What was he getting out of it? Was it just a game to him? Did he ever care about me at all? I'll probably never know the answers, and maybe that's okay. Maybe some things are better left unanswered. I'm trying to focus on the present, on moving forward, on creating a life that's fulfilling and meaningful, with or without a partner. Dating, it seems, will have to wait. I want to get to know myself again first. I want to love myself first. I still can't make sense of what happened, but maybe I don't have to. I just have to make sure it never happens again. Okay, so you are absolutely not going to believe this, but I have to tell someone. I mean, Ivy told my best friend Chloe, but she just keeps saying, "I told you so." And honestly, that's not the support I need right now. This is a saga, a full-blown, dumpster fire-level saga of dating app disasters, misread signals, and a plot twist so insane it could be its own Lifetime movie. It all started innocently enough. I'd been single for, well, let's just say longer than I care to admit. My last real relationship ended with him eloping with his yoga instructor. True story, Dante Judge. And after that, I kind of swore off men for a while. But then, time marches on, and so does the nagging feeling that maybe, just maybe, I should put myself back out there. So I downloaded Hinge. Figured it was the classier of the dating apps. Less about swiping based on a single photo, and more about actual profiles with prompts and stuff. I spent a solid afternoon crafting the perfect bio, choosing flattering, but not too flattering photos, and answering the prompts with just the right mix of humor and vulnerability. I thought I was ready. I was so wrong. At first, things were normal. The usual dating app experience. Lots of hey messages, a few conversations that fizzled out after a couple of days, the occasional guy who clearly hadn't read my profile and asked me if I was DTF. Seriously, people still say that. But then I matched with him. Let's call him Arthur, because that was his actual name. Arthur seemed different. He wasn't conventionally attractive, but he had this kind of quirky charm. His profile was full of pictures of him hiking, volunteering at an animal shelter, and playing the ukulele. Okay, maybe that last one was a little questionable, but I was trying to be open-minded. He seemed genuinely kind and interesting, and our conversations flowed easily. We talked about everything. Our families, our jobs, our hobbies, our dreams for the future. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, and I found myself actually looking forward to his messages. After a week or so of chatting, he asked me out. I hesitated for a moment. I was still a little wary after my last dating experience, but I decided to take a chance. Our first date was surprisingly great. We met for coffee at a local bookstore cafe. Arthur was even more charming in person. He was a good listener. He made me laugh, and he seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say. We talked for hours, and I completely lost track of time. By the end of the date, I was actually starting to feel optimistic about this whole dating thing. We went on a few more dates after that. We went to a museum, saw a movie, and even went for a hike in the woods. He didn't play the ukulele. Thank God. Each date was better than the last. I was starting to really like Arthur. He was kind, funny, intelligent, and genuinely seemed to care about me. I was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, I had finally found someone special. And that's when things started to get weird. It started subtly. He started texting me more frequently, sometimes multiple times an hour. He started asking me about my schedule, wanting to know where I was and what I was doing at all times. At first, I just brushed it off as him being interested, but it quickly started to feel excessive. Then, he started showing up at places I hadn't told him I would be. Like, I'd be at my favorite coffee shop, and suddenly, there he was, claiming he just happened to be in the area. Or I'd be at a yoga class, and he'd be there, stretching awkwardly in the back, even though he'd never expressed any interest in yoga before. I started to feel like I was being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that Arthur was always just a little too close, a little too present in my life. It was like he was trying to insert himself into every aspect of my existence. I tried to talk to him about it, but he just brushed it off. He said he was just really into me and wanted to spend as much time with me as possible. He said I was being paranoid and that I was reading too much into things. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But my gut was telling me something was wrong. Very wrong. One night, I was at home, watching TV, when I got a text from Arthur. I am outside, it said. I was confused. Outside where? I texted back. Your apartment, he replied. I wanted to surprise you. I felt a chill run down my spine. Arthur, it's late. Yem tired. Can we do this another time? But I brought you flowers, he texted back. And I made your favorite cookies. I didn't respond. I peeked through the blinds and saw him standing on the sidewalk, holding a bouquet of roses and a plate of what looked like chocolate chip cookies. He was smiling, but it was a creepy, unsettling smile. I didn't open the door. I turned off all the lights and pretended I wasn't home. After about an hour, he finally left. I didn't sleep that night. I was too scared. I kept imagining him outside my window, watching me. The next day, I decided I had to end things with Arthur. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering when he was going to show up next. I called him and told him I needed to talk. We met at a park near my apartment. I tried to be as gentle as possible, but I was firm. I told him I didn't think we were a good match and that I needed some space. He didn't take it well. He started crying, begging me to reconsider. He said he loved me, that I was the only person who had ever truly understood him. He said he couldn't live without me. I felt bad for him, but I knew I had to stand my ground. I told him I was sorry, but my decision was final. He finally agreed to leave, but not before making me promise that we could still be friends. I reluctantly agreed, just to get him to go away. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I had finally gotten rid of him. I was wrong. So wrong. A few days later, I started getting weird phone calls. They were always at odd hours, late at night or early in the morning. When I answered, there was just silence on the other end. I blocked the number, but the calls kept coming from different numbers. I realized Arthur was using burner phones to harass me. Then the emails started. They were always anonymous, but they were clearly from him. They were full of insults and accusations. He said I was a heartless bitch, that I had ruined his life, that I would regret breaking up with him. I reported him to the police, but they said there was nothing they could do unless he actually threatened me. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was being stalked, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. And then came the plot twist. One afternoon, I was checking my mail when I found a letter addressed to me. It was handwritten, and the return address was unfamiliar. I opened it, and inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of Arthur, but it wasn't a recent picture. It was an old picture, taken years ago. In the picture, Arthur was standing next to a woman, a young, beautiful woman with long blonde hair. The woman was smiling and had her arm wrapped around Arthur's waist. I didn't recognize the woman, but something about her seemed familiar. I flipped the picture over, and on the back was written a single word: run. I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't know what the picture meant, but I knew it couldn't be good. I decided to do some digging. I used all my internet skills to find information about Arthur. I searched his name, his address, his social media profiles, and that's when I found it. An article about a missing woman, a young woman with long blonde hair who had disappeared without a trace several years ago. I always considered myself pretty good at reading people. Street smart, some might say. Growing up in the city, you learn to spot the hustlers, the weirdos, the ones to avoid. So, when I met Mark on that dating app, I wasn't overly concerned. He seemed normal enough, maybe even a little shy. But there was this low-level hum of unease that kept buzzing in the back of my mind, a feeling I chalked up to first date jitters. I even went out with him a second time. Now that I look back, I think I was being manipulated more than I knew. We met for coffee the first time, a safe bet. Mark was taller than I expected, with kind eyes and a hesitant smile. He worked as a software developer, liked hiking, and had a surprisingly extensive knowledge of obscure film noir. The conversation flowed easily, maybe too easily. He seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, asked thoughtful questions, and actually listened to my answers. He was complimentary without being overbearing, attentive without being clingy. It was all very calculated. My friends, Sarah and Emily, were immediately suspicious. Software developer who likes hiking and film noir? Sounds like a serial killer starter pack. Sarah joked, but there was a hint of seriousness in her voice. I brushed it off, telling them they were being ridiculous. He's just a normal guy, I insisted. Maybe you guys are just used to dating jerks. The second date was a dinner, my suggestion. I wanted to see him in a different setting, gauge his reactions in a more intimate environment. He chose a small Italian place in my neighborhood, a spot I loved for its cozy atmosphere and authentic pasta. Again, he was the perfect gentleman. Pulled out my chair, made sure I liked the wine, even remembered that I was allergic to shellfish. It was almost too perfect. I began to wonder if he was doing all of these things to create a good impression, or if it was genuine. I started being aware of all the little things that he did, and made sure that I watched him at all times. That night, after he dropped me off, he texted me almost immediately. Had a great time tonight. Can't wait to see you again. I replied with a simple me too, but a sense of dread washed over me. I wasn't sure what it was, but something felt off. I decided to confide in my mom. She didn't even know that I was dating. I confided in my mom, and she seemed excited about the idea that I was dating someone. Of course, my mom did her mom things. Oh, what does he do? What's his family like? Are you being safe? So many questions all at once, but I figured that that's what moms were for. After I told her all the things that Mark and I had in common, she was happy for me. She told me to continue getting to know him, and that I'd be able to see who he really was over time. The next few weeks were a blur of dates and texts. Mark was constantly reaching out, wanting to see me, wanting to talk. He started mentioning things like our future and when we move in together, which, for someone who's only been on 2 dates with, I felt like that was way too soon to start considering that. I started noticing patterns in his behavior. He always steered the conversation back to me, asking about my dreams, my fears, my insecurities. He would listen intently, nodding and making sympathetic noises, but he rarely shared anything about himself. It was like he was building a profile of me, collecting data for some unknown purpose. He'd go out of his way to compliment me in the things that I was most insecure about. It was like he knew me better than I knew myself. I began getting paranoia about whether or not Mark was even real. One evening, we were walking through the park, and he asked about my childhood. I started telling him about my parents' divorce, a painful topic I usually avoided. He listened patiently, offering words of comfort and understanding. Then, he said something that made my blood run cold. It must have been hard, growing up in that house on Willow Creek Road. All those arguments must have been difficult to deal with. I stopped dead in my tracks. How did you know about that house? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I had never mentioned where I grew up. Not to him. Not to anyone I had met recently. He just smiled a slow, unsettling smile. I know a lot about you, he said. More than you think. That was it. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just being paranoid. I was being watched. I made up an excuse about feeling sick and rushed home, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night, replaying every interaction with Mark in my head, searching for clues I might have missed. I was getting manipulated, but I wasn't sure how. I was beginning to be very concerned. The next morning, I called Sarah and Emily, telling them everything. They were both horrified, urging me to go to the police. I was hesitant, unsure if I had enough evidence. I didn't have anything to show for the fear that I was feeling, and I didn't want to look crazy. Instead, we decided to do some investigating of our own. Sarah, the tech whiz, started digging into Mark's online presence. Emily, the social butterfly, started asking around, seeing if anyone knew him. What they found was disturbing. Mark's social media profiles were almost non-existent, just a few generic posts and photos. There was no trace of him online, which was weird. Emily discovered that no one in the local software development community had ever heard of him. It was like he didn't exist. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I went to the address listed on his driver's license, a small apartment building in a run-down part of town. The building manager told me that no one by the name of Mark lived there. He showed me the tenant list, and there was no matching name. The manager did mention that the apartment listed was vacant and used to be owned by an old man before he died. Now, more afraid than ever, I called the police and reported Mark. The police brushed the report off because I didn't have enough evidence to do anything. He didn't break any laws, is what I was told. This was infuriating. I knew I had to take matters into my own hands to protect myself. That evening, I received a text from Mark. "I know you've been looking into me. You shouldn't have done that." My heart pounded in my chest. He was watching me. He knew what I was doing. I didn't respond. I turned off my phone and hid it in a drawer. I packed a bag with essentials, planning to stay at Sarah's house for a few days. As I was leaving my apartment, I noticed something strange. The doormat outside my door was slightly askew. I bent down to straighten it, and that's when I saw it. A small camera, hidden underneath the mat, pointed directly at my front door. I ripped it off the ground, smashing it to pieces. I ran out of the building, terrified. I stayed at Sarah's house for a week, constantly looking over my shoulder. I barely slept, haunted by the feeling that Mark was always watching. The police eventually took my claim seriously because I provided the hidden camera as evidence and started monitoring my apartment. However, nothing seemed to happen, and they eventually dropped the investigation. My life went back to normal, but I'll always be paranoid. One night, months later, I was walking home from work when I saw him. He was standing across the street, partially hidden in the shadows. Our eyes met, and he smiled that same unsettling smile. I froze, paralyzed with fear. He didn't move, just stood there, watching me. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. I never saw him again, but I know he's still out there. Somewhere. Watching. Waiting. I thought I was being paranoid, but I was wrong. I was being hunted. Now, I always keep an eye out when I'm on the street, and always make sure to check for people staring at me. I never fully recovered from this experience, and probably never will. So I need to tell someone about this. I've been holding it in for too long, and it's starting to mess with my head. It happened a little over a year ago, and I still get chills thinking about it. I was freshly divorced, dipping my toes back into the dating pool, and let me tell you, it was a swamp. I tried all the apps, Bumble, Hinge, even gave Tinder another shot, but it was mostly the same old song and dance. Blurry photos, guys who only talked about themselves, and the occasional creep who couldn't take a hint. Then I matched with Ethan, and at first, he seemed normal, refreshingly so. His profile had clear, recent photos of him hiking, playing guitar, and hanging out with friends. His bio was witty and self-deprecating, and he actually asked me questions about my life, beyond what I did for work. We messaged back and forth for a few days, and the conversation flowed easily. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, not just trying to get me into bed. We decided to meet for coffee. He suggested this little cafe downtown, the kind with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. I got there a few minutes early, and was instantly relieved when I saw him walk in. He looked even better in person, tall, with kind eyes and a warm smile. We talked for hours that day, about our divorces, our families, our hobbies. Everything felt so natural and easy. It felt like I'd known him forever. We started seeing each other regularly. Movies, dinners, walks in the park. It was all very conventional. And honestly, after the mess of my marriage, I was craving conventional. He was attentive, thoughtful, and seemed to genuinely care about my happiness. He even brought me flowers on our third date, Which, okay, maybe it's a little cheesy, but I ate it up. I was starting to fall for him. Things started to get weird subtly, almost imperceptibly. Little things at first, things I brushed off as quirks or just me being overly sensitive. He started showing up at my apartment unannounced, just wanting to say hi. He'd call me multiple times a day. Even when I told him I was busy at work, he'd ask me detailed questions about my schedule, my friends, my ex-husband, things that felt a little too personal, too soon. He started getting jealous. If I mentioned a male co-worker, he'd grill me about our relationship. If I went out with my girlfriends, he'd call me repeatedly, wanting to know who I was with and what we were doing. He started accusing me of lying to him, of hiding things, of not being all in on the relationship. I tried to reassure him, to explain that I needed space, but it was like talking to a wall. Then came the gifts. At first, they were sweet. A book by my favorite author, a cozy blanket for my couch. But then they started getting odd. A vintage locket with a picture of a woman I didn't recognize, an antique doll with unsettlingly lifelike eyes, a framed photograph of my apartment building that he'd apparently taken without me knowing. The doll was the turning point for me. I was already feeling increasingly uncomfortable, but that doll, something about it just freaked me out. I told him I didn't want it, that it made me uneasy, but he insisted I keep it, saying it would protect me. I tried to return it to him, but he wouldn't take it back. He said it was a gift, and I had to accept it. I started avoiding him. I stopped answering his calls, made excuses when he asked to see me. I knew I needed to break things off, but I was scared. There was a possessiveness in his eyes, a simmering anger beneath the surface that terrified me. I knew that if I tried to leave, he wouldn't let me go easily. One night, I came home from work to find my apartment door unlocked. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I slowly pushed the door open and stepped inside. Ethan was sitting on my couch, waiting for me. The doll was sitting next to him. He smiled when he saw me. "I was worried about you," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. "I thought I'd come over and make sure you were okay." I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed with fear. I backed away slowly, reaching for my phone. "I think you should leave," I managed to say, my voice trembling. He stood up and walked towards me, his eyes fixed on mine. "We're meant to be together," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I know it, and you know it too." He grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. I tried to pull away, but he wouldn't let go. "Don't fight it," he said. "Just accept it. We can be happy together, I promise." I knew I had to get out of there. I had to get away from him. I took a deep breath and screamed as loud as I could. He flinched, momentarily loosening his grip. I yanked my hand away and ran towards the door. He grabbed me again, pulling me back towards him. We struggled, and I felt myself falling. I hit my head on the edge of the coffee table, and everything went black. I woke up in my bed. The room was dark, and my head was pounding. I sat up slowly, trying to get my bearings. Ethan was sitting in a chair next to my bed, watching me. The doll was on the nightstand. "You're awake," he said, his voice soft. "I was so worried about you." He reached out to touch my face, but I flinched away. "What happened?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "You fell," he said. "You hit your head. I've been taking care of you." I didn't believe him. I knew he was lying. I knew he had done something to me. I tried to get out of bed, but he stopped me. "You need to rest," he said. "You're not well." He pushed me back down onto the pillows and covered me with a blanket. "I'll be right here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." I knew I was trapped. I knew he wasn't going to let me leave. I spent the next few days in a haze of fear and confusion. He wouldn't let me use my phone, wouldn't let me leave the apartment. He kept telling me how much he loved me, how we were meant to be together, how he would never let anything happen to me. I started to believe him, a little bit. Maybe I was wrong about him. Maybe he really did care about me. Maybe I was just overreacting. But then I saw it. One morning, while he was in the shower, I managed to sneak a peek at his phone. I found a folder full of pictures of me. Pictures taken through my windows. Pictures taken while I was sleeping. Pictures taken while I was changing. He had been stalking me. He had been watching me. He was obsessed with me. The realization washed over me like a bucket of ice water. I knew I had to escape. I knew that if I stayed with him, I would never be safe. I started planning my escape. I knew I had to be careful, that I couldn't let him suspect anything. I pretended to be better, to be more accepting of his affection. I told him I loved him too, that I wanted to be with him forever. He seemed to believe me. He started giving me more freedom, letting me use my phone for short periods, letting me go outside for walks, as long as he was with me. One day, he took me to a park a few blocks from my apartment. We were walking along a path, and I saw my chance. I pretended to trip and fall, faking an injury. He rushed to help me, and as he did, I kicked him as hard as I could in the groin. He doubled over in pain, and I ran. I ran as fast as I could, not looking back. I ran until I reached a busy street, where I flagged down a taxi. I told the driver to take me to the nearest police station. When I arrived, I told the police everything. They took me seriously, launched an investigation, and arrested Ethan a few days later. They found a storage unit filled with disturbing items, photos of me, newspaper clippings about missing women, and a collection of antique dolls, all with unsettlingly lifelike eyes. He was charged with stalking, kidnapping, and assault. He's currently awaiting trial. I'm still terrified. I still have nightmares. I moved to a different city, changed my name, and started therapy. I'm trying to rebuild my life, but it's hard. The experience has left me scarred, distrustful, and constantly looking over my shoulder. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust anyone again. I don't know if I'll ever be able to feel safe again. The whole experience changed me, and not for the better. It was the most terrifying experience of my life, and I just needed to get it off my chest. This experience has forever changed my view on dating. I thought I found the one, and I thought he was just a great guy, but he was dangerous. Dating is dangerous. Meeting people online is dangerous, and I never thought I would be someone that it would happen to. I wish someone had warned me about the curated hellscapes of modern dating apps. Not just the catfish or the ghosting. Everyone knows about that. I'm talking about the slow, insidious erosion of your self-worth, the way it warps your perception of reality, and the sheer, exhausting sameness of it all. I'm not saying it's all bad. I met my ex on one, so I know that actual relationships can emerge from the digital swamp. But the odds are stacked against you. And the process. God, the process is brutal. It started innocently enough, a few years ago. I was newly single, a bit lonely, and all my friends were either partnered up or swiping furiously. Peer pressure, I guess. Plus, the promise of instant connection, of bypassing the awkward small talk and the forced introductions, was alluring. So I downloaded the apps, Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, the whole shebang, and dove in head first. The first few weeks were a novelty. Endless scrolling, judging faces and bios in a split second, matching with people I would never have approached in real life. The dopamine hits of a new match, the flirty banter, the excitement of a potential date. It was like a game, and I was determined to win. But the game quickly turned repetitive. The same profile pictures, guys holding fish, girls posing with dogs, everyone inexplicably on top of Machu Picchu. The same predictable bios, fluent in sarcasm. Looking for my partner in crime. Adventure awaits. The same opening lines, hey, how's your weekend going? You have beautiful eyes. It all felt so manufactured. Like everyone was trying to project an image of themselves that was just slightly more interesting, more attractive, more dateable than they actually were. And then there were the conversations. The endless, mind-numbing conversations that went nowhere. You'd match with someone, exchange a few messages, and then nothing. Or worse, the conversations that started strong but fizzled out after a few days, leaving you wondering what you did wrong. I started overthinking every message, analyzing every emoji, trying to decipher the hidden meaning behind every word. Was I too eager? Too aloof? Too boring? I went on a few dates, of course. Most of them were forgettable. Awkward silences, forced laughter, the desperate search for common ground. One guy spent the entire evening talking about his crypto investments. Another kept checking his phone every 5 minutes. One actually showed up wearing a fedora. I swear, it's like a horror movie. But there were a few that seemed promising. Genuine connection, witty banter, shared interests. You'd leave the date feeling optimistic, thinking maybe, just maybe, this could be something. And then ghosted. No explanation, no goodbye, just silence. It happened so many times that I started to expect it. I started to believe that I was somehow unworthy of a real relationship, that there was something inherently wrong with me that made people want to disappear. The app started to affect my self-esteem. I became hyper-aware of my flaws, obsessing over my weight, my hair, my clothes. I compared myself to every girl I saw on the apps, convinced that they were all prettier, smarter, more interesting than me. I started editing my pictures, using filters to smooth out my wrinkles and brighten my smile. I wanted to present the best possible version of myself, even if it wasn't entirely authentic. I became addicted to the validation. The likes, the matches, the compliments. They were like little dopamine hits that temporarily filled the void. But the feeling never lasted. As soon as the high wore off, I was back to feeling empty and insecure. I tried to quit the apps. I really did. I deleted them, swore them off, told myself I was better off alone. But then the loneliness would creep back in, and I'd find myself downloading them again, hoping for a different outcome. I was trapped in a cycle of hope and disappointment, validation and rejection. One of the worst things about dating apps is the illusion of choice. You have access to thousands of potential partners, but that doesn't necessarily mean you'll find someone better. In fact, it can make you more picky, more critical, more likely to dismiss someone based on superficial criteria. I remember one guy I matched with who seemed perfect on paper. He was smart, funny, and had a great job. We had a lot in common, and our conversations flowed easily. But when we met in person, I just wasn't feeling it. There was something about his smile that bothered me, or maybe the way he held his fork. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew I couldn't see myself dating him. I ended things after a few dates, feeling guilty and shallow. I started to realize that I was treating people like commodities, swiping left or right based on a few pictures and a short bio. I was reducing them to their perceived value, ignoring their complexities and their humanity. And I was doing the same to myself. The apps also skewed my perception of reality. I started to believe that everyone was on them, that they were the only way to meet people. I forgot how to flirt in real life, how to strike up a conversation with a stranger, how to connect with someone without the buffer of a screen. I became increasingly cynical about love and relationships. I started to believe that everyone was just looking for a hookup, that no one wanted anything real. I lost faith in the possibility of finding a meaningful connection. It took me a long time to break free from the cycle. It wasn't a sudden realization or a dramatic epiphany. It was a slow, gradual process of self-reflection and self-care. I started spending more time on my hobbies, reconnecting with old friends, and focusing on my own happiness. I stopped seeking validation from others and started to appreciate myself for who I was. I still have the apps on my phone, but I rarely use them. I've learned to be more discerning, to focus on quality over quantity, and to prioritize my own well-being. I've also learned to be more patient, to trust that the right person will come along when the time is right. I'm not saying dating apps can never work, but it's a dangerous game, and the price you pay could be your faith in yourself. I wish someone had warned me about the curated hellscapes of modern dating apps. I wish someone had told me that they could warp my perception of reality, erode my self-worth, and make me cynical about love. I wish someone had said, "It's not you, it's the apps." Maybe I would have saved myself a lot of heartache and wasted time. Okay, so I met Jake on Hinge. Totally normal, right? Swipe, match, chat, the whole dance. His profile was pretty generic. Hiking pictures, a blurry shot of him playing guitar, and a bio that said something about loving craft beer and rescue dogs. But his messages were different. He wasn't just sending hey, or asking about my weekend. He actually seemed interested. He asked about my photography, my weird obsession with true crime podcasts, and even remembered that I mentioned I was trying to learn how to knit. That's already more thought than most guys put into initial messages. We talked for a couple weeks before we decided to meet up. I was cautiously optimistic. He seemed genuine, intelligent, and honestly, kind of cute in his awkwardly posed hiking pics. We made plans to grab coffee at this little independent place near my apartment. I sent my best friend Sarah the usual if I go missing. Look for a guy named Jake who likes IPAs, text, and headed out. The coffee date was great. Like, unexpectedly great. He was even better in person, funny, engaging, and genuinely interested in what I had to say. We talked for hours, losing track of time entirely. There were no awkward silences, no forced conversation, just easy, natural connection. I felt like I had known him for years. I remember walking home that night thinking, okay, maybe this is it. Maybe this is actually going somewhere. We started seeing each other regularly. Hikes, movies, dinners, even a couple of weekend trips. He was always thoughtful and attentive. He remembered small details about my life, surprised me with little gifts, a new lens cap for my camera, a rare vinyl record from one of my favorite bands, and always made me feel like I was the most important person in the world when I was with him. I was falling hard and fast. He was also kind of private. He didn't have social media, which he said he just wasn't into. He never talked about his family or his past. He had a job in IT, but he was vague about the specifics. At first, I didn't think much of it. Some people just value their privacy, and I respected that. But as we got closer, I started to wonder. I mean, who doesn't have at least a Facebook account? And it felt weird that I knew next to nothing about his life before he met me. I tried to bring it up a few times, casually asking about his family or his childhood, but he always brushed it off with a joke or changed the subject. It wasn't a hostile reaction, just avoidance. And because I was so invested in the relationship, I let it go. I told myself I was being insecure and that everyone has their own boundaries. Then things started getting unsettling. It was subtle at first, little things that I could easily dismiss as coincidences. Like, I'd mention I was going to a particular coffee shop, and he'd happen to be there. Or I'd post a picture on my private Instagram story of me at a certain location, and he'd text me a few minutes later, saying he was nearby, and asking if I wanted to meet up. I initially thought it was sweet, that he was just trying to spend more time with me. But then it started happening more frequently. It felt like he was always just a little too close, a little too aware of my movements. It was like he was anticipating my actions before I even made them. One night, I was working late at the office. I hadn't told Jake I was staying late, but he texted me around 9 p.m., asking if I was still at work and if I wanted him to bring me dinner. I was freaked out. How did he know I was still there? I hadn't told anyone. I made some excuse and said I was just about to leave, but I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. That's when I started doing some digging. I know, it's a cliché, but I was starting to feel genuinely scared, and I needed to know who this guy really was. I started with a simple Google search. Nothing. No social media, no news articles, no mention of him anywhere online. It was like he didn't exist before he met me on Hinge. I tried searching his name with variations of his job title, his supposed hometown, anything I could think of. Still nothing. It was like he was a ghost. Then I got desperate. I used a reverse image search on one of the pictures he had sent me. Again, nothing. The image didn't appear anywhere else online. It was like he had created a fake profile using stolen or AI-generated photos. I started going through my old messages, looking for any clue, any detail that might give me some insight into his real identity. And that's when I noticed something strange. In several of his messages, the timestamps were off. Like, he'd send me a message at 2 a.m., but the timestamp would say 2 p.m., or vice versa. At first, I thought it was just a glitch with the app, but then I realized that the timestamps were consistently wrong, and they were always skewed by exactly 12 hours. I started obsessing over it, trying to figure out what it meant. And then it hit me. He wasn't living in the same time zone as me. He was living 12 hours ahead, which meant he was somewhere in Asia. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Why would a guy in Asia pretend to be a local and start a relationship with me? What was he hiding? I decided I needed to confront him. I couldn't keep living in this state of fear and uncertainty. I texted him, asking if we could talk that night. He responded immediately, saying he'd be at my apartment in an hour. I paced around my apartment, my mind racing. I had a million questions, and I didn't know where to start. When he finally arrived, he seemed his usual charming self. He gave me a hug, kissed me on the forehead, and asked how my day was. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling slightly. He looked at me, his smile fading. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath and just laid it all out. I told him about the Google searches, the reverse image search, the weird timestamps. I told him that I knew he wasn't who he said he was. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face. But it wasn't the warm, genuine smile I had come to love. It was a cold, unsettling smile that sent shivers down my spine. "You're smarter than I thought," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I was starting to think you were never going to figure it out." I felt my blood run cold. "Who are you?" I whispered. He chuckled. "That's not important. What's important is that you and I have a connection. A real connection. And I wasn't going to let something like distance stand in the way of that. You lied to me, I said, my voice rising. Everything you told me was a lie. Not everything, he said, stepping closer to me. I really do love hiking and rescue dogs. And you? I recoiled, disgusted. Stay away from me. He ignored me and reached out to touch my face. We're meant to be together, he said, his eyes fixated on mine. I know it. You know it. Don't fight it. I slapped his hand away. Get out of my apartment. His expression hardened. You're making a mistake, he said. You don't know what you're giving up. I stood my ground, my heart pounding in my chest. I know exactly what I'm giving up, I said. I'm giving up a stalker, a liar, a psychopath. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes burning with anger. Then, without saying another word, he turned and walked out of my apartment. I slammed the door behind him and locked it, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I called the police, but they said there was nothing they could do since he hadn't technically committed a crime. They took my statement and advised me to get a restraining order. I spent the next few weeks living in a state of constant fear. I changed my locks, installed a security system, and carried pepper spray everywhere I went. I was terrified that Jake would come back, that he would try to hurt me. But he didn't. He disappeared. He deleted his Hinge profile, and I never heard from him again. And that's when the scariest part hit me. It wasn't just that he lied or that he was stalking me. It was when I realized that somewhere on the other side of the world, a man was living a completely different life, but he invested an incredible amount of time and effort in building a connection with me based on a lie. It was the sheer dedication to the deception, the meticulous planning and execution, that truly terrified me. It made me realize how easily someone could infiltrate your life, manipulate your emotions, and completely shatter your sense of reality. If this man could do this, I could never know who was watching, who I was talking to, and I had to question the validity of every interaction I had in the future, that the person I had let into my life, into my heart, was a complete stranger, and I never knew when he would return. Okay, so after that Craigslist debacle, I swore off unconventional living situations and pretty much all online platforms for finding anything, jobs, roommates, or especially dates. I took the grocery store job, found a tiny, overpriced apartment closer to the city, and tried to settle into a normal, predictable routine. I told myself I was done with the drama, the weirdness, the potential for lurking serial killers disguised as sweet old ladies. I was going to be boring, blissfully, safely boring. For a while it worked. I stocked shelves, went home, watched bad TV, and occasionally met up with a friend from college for a movie or a coffee. But after a few months, the boredom started to get to me. My friends were all getting married or moving away. The dating scene in real life felt even more daunting than online. All the pressure of first impressions and forced small talk with no safety net of a profile to hide behind. That's when Sarah came along. Sarah was a co-worker at the grocery store. She worked in the bakery, and I swear, she always smelled like cinnamon and vanilla. She was bubbly and outgoing, the kind of person who could make anyone feel comfortable. She had this infectious laugh and a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. And she was gorgeous, like ridiculously so. Dark hair, bright green eyes, a smile that could melt glaciers. I was instantly smitten, but I didn't think I had a chance. She was way out of my league. But then, one day, she started talking to me. Just casual stuff at first, asking about my weekend or commenting on my terrible taste in music. But then the conversations got longer, more personal. She told me about her dreams of opening her own bakery, her love of old movies, and her complicated relationship with her family. I found myself looking forward to seeing her at work, counting down the minutes until our next shift together. We started eating lunch together, then grabbing drinks after work. One night, she asked me if I wanted to come over to her place to watch a movie. I was terrified. This was it. My chance to either make a fool of myself or actually have a real, adult relationship. I spent the entire day agonizing over what to wear, what to say, what snacks to bring. I finally settled on a comfortable pair of jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a bag of gourmet popcorn. Her apartment was small but cozy, filled with plants and quirky artwork. She had a cat named Mr. Whiskers, who immediately took a liking to me, rubbing against my legs and purring loudly. We settled on the couch, and she put on an old black and white film. I was so nervous that I barely paid attention to the movie. I was too busy trying to read her signals, trying to figure out if she felt the same way I did. Then, during a particularly dramatic scene, she leaned in and kissed me. It was amazing. Everything I had hoped for and more. We spent the rest of the night talking, laughing, and kissing. I felt like I was floating on air. This was it. This was the start of something real. We started dating officially, and things were perfect. We went on hikes, explored new restaurants, and spent hours just talking. She was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. Kind, funny, intelligent, and beautiful. I was head over heels in love. But then, after a few months, things started to change. It started subtly. Little things that I could easily dismiss. She started being more secretive about her phone, always turning it face down when I was around. She became more distant, less affectionate. She started working longer hours at the bakery, and she wasn't as available to hang out. I tried to talk to her about it, but she always brushed it off, saying she was just stressed about work. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One night, I was at her apartment while she was at work. I was waiting for her to get off, and I decided to surprise her by cleaning up a little. I started with the kitchen, wiping down the counters and doing the dishes. That's when I found it. Hidden in the back of a drawer, under a pile of old receipts, was a small, velvet box. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I shouldn't look, but I couldn't resist. I opened the box, and inside was a ring. A diamond ring. It wasn't just any ring. It was an engagement ring. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. My world started to spin, and I couldn't breathe. I stumbled back, clutching the ring box, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Who was this ring for? Was she engaged to someone else? Had she been lying to me this whole time? I couldn't stay there any longer. I grabbed my things and ran out of the apartment, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know where to go or what to do. I just needed to get away. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to process what I had just discovered. I replayed every moment of our relationship in my head, searching for clues that I had missed. Had she ever mentioned another boyfriend? Had she ever acted strangely when I talked about the future? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that there had been signs all along. The secretive phone, the late nights at work, the sudden distance. I had been so blinded by love that I hadn't seen the truth staring me in the face. I finally decided to confront her. I drove back to her apartment, my hands shaking, my heart pounding. I waited outside for her to get home, my mind racing with questions and accusations. When she finally arrived, she looked surprised to see me. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tight. I held out the ring box. "I found this," I said, my voice trembling. Her face paled. She didn't say anything, just stared at the box in my hand. "Who is it for, Sarah?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Are you engaged to someone else?" She hesitated for a moment, then finally nodded. "Yes," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. But what about us?" I stammered. I thought you loved me." She looked down at the ground, avoiding my gaze. "I do love you," she said softly. "But it's complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, my voice rising. "What's complicated about being engaged to someone else while you're dating me?" She finally looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "It's an arranged marriage," she said. "My family, they expect me to marry him. I don't have a choice." I stared at her in disbelief. An arranged marriage? In this day and age? It sounded like something out of a movie. "So what?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You were just using me to pass the time until you had to marry some guy you don't even love?" She shook her head. "No, it's not like that," she said, her voice pleading. "I really do care about you, but I can't just abandon my family. I can't break their hearts." "What about my heart, Sarah?" I asked, my voice breaking. "What about the fact that you completely lied to me and betrayed my trust?" She didn't have an answer. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face, as I turned and walked away. I never saw Sarah again. I quit my job at the grocery store and moved back in with my cousin. I was a complete mess for months, drowning my sorrows in cheap beer and bad TV. I couldn't believe that I had been so naive, so trusting. I had fallen for her so hard, and she had just used me and thrown me away. It's been years since that happened, and I've tried to move on. I've had other relationships, but none of them have ever felt quite the same. I'm always waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the truth to come out, for the person I love to betray me. I don't think I'll ever fully recover from what happened with Sarah. It taught me a hard lesson about trust and deception. It showed me that even the most beautiful, charming people can be capable of terrible things. And sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, haunted by the image of that engagement ring, wondering what could have been if things had been different. What if she had chosen me over her family? What if she had been honest with me from the start? I'll never know. And that's the thing that haunts my dreams the most. It's not the betrayal, not the lies, not even the arranged marriage. It's the what if, the endless, unanswered what if that will always be a part of my story. Dating in this day and age can be difficult, but always have that little bit of caution. Just because the water looks clear doesn't mean it is safe. The dating app was called Serendipity, which, in hindsight, was darkly ironic. It wasn't one of the mainstream ones, not Tinder or Bumble or Hinge. This one was niche, catered to people who believed in fate, in meant-to-be connections, in the idea that the universe had a grand plan for their love life. Corny, I know, but after a string of disastrous relationships and soul-crushing first dates, I was willing to try anything. Plus, the interface was sleek and aesthetically pleasing, all muted colors and flowing fonts. It felt sophisticated, somehow. The app worked by asking you a series of deeply personal questions about your beliefs, your fears, your desires. Then, it used some mysterious algorithm to match you with people who supposedly aligned with your soul's path. I rolled my eyes at the language, but I answered the questions honestly. I laid bare my insecurities, my hopes for a family, my secret longing for a partner who understood my introverted nature. A few days later, the app presented me with my serendipitous soulmate, a guy named Julian. His profile was intriguing. He was a writer, specializing in folklore and mythology. His photos were atmospheric, all grainy black and white shots of him wandering through ancient forests or sitting in dimly lit libraries. He looked thoughtful, artistic, and just a little bit brooding. He wrote in his bio, "I'm searching for someone who understands the whispers of the past." It was pretentious, sure, but it also resonated with me. I'd always been drawn to history, to the stories that echoed through time. We started messaging, and the conversations were unlike anything I'd experienced before. Julian didn't do small talk. He asked me about my dreams, my recurring nightmares, the moments in my life that had shaped me. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know the real me, the person I usually kept hidden behind layers of sarcasm and self-deprecation. He shared his own vulnerabilities, his struggles with writer's block, his fascination with the darker aspects of human nature. It was intense, exhilarating, and a little bit unsettling. After a week of messaging, we decided to meet in person. He suggested a secluded coffee shop on the outskirts of town, one known for its quirky atmosphere and its extensive collection of antique books. I hesitated. It felt a little too on the nose, a little too perfectly aligned with the serendipity aesthetic. But I told myself I was being ridiculous. He was just a guy who liked old things, just like me. The coffee shop was even more atmospheric than I'd imagined. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and strong coffee, and the walls were lined with bookshelves overflowing with forgotten volumes. Julian was waiting for me at a corner table, bathed in the soft glow of a vintage lamp. He looked even more striking in person, his dark eyes intense and his features sharp and angular. The date was strange. The conversation flowed easily, but there was an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. He asked me about my ancestors, my family history, if there were any unresolved mysteries in my lineage. I told him about my great-grandmother, who had disappeared without a trace in the 1920s, a story that had always haunted my family. Julian's eyes lit up. He said that disappearances were often signs of something deeper, that sometimes the past reached out and claimed those who were most connected to it. He started telling me about his own research, about ancient rituals and forgotten cults, about the belief that certain places were thin, that the veil between worlds was weaker in those locations. He spoke with such conviction, such passion, that I found myself getting swept up in his stories, even though I knew they were probably just embellished folklore. As the night wore on, Julian's behavior became increasingly erratic. He started glancing nervously around the coffee shop, as if he expected someone to be watching us. He kept repeating the phrase, "Time is cyclical," and muttering about the coming convergence. I tried to steer the conversation back to more normal topics, but he seemed fixated on his own strange theories. Finally, he stood up abruptly. "I have to show you something," he said, his eyes wide and urgent. "Something you need to see." He wouldn't tell me what it was, only that it was important and that it would change everything. He insisted that we leave the coffee shop immediately. I was hesitant, but something about his intensity convinced me to go along with him. We drove in his beat-up Volvo to a secluded area in the woods, a place I'd never been before. The air was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth, and the only light came from the moon filtering through the trees. Julien led me down a narrow path, deeper and deeper into the woods. He didn't say a word, but his grip on my hand was tight, and his pace was quick. I started to get a bad feeling, a sense of dread that settled heavy in my stomach. I asked him where we were going, but he just smiled cryptically and said, "You'll see." Finally, we arrived at a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a stone altar, overgrown with moss and ivy. It looked ancient, like it had been there for centuries. Julien released my hand and walked towards the altar, his eyes shining in the moonlight. "This is it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "This is where the past meets the present." He turned to me, his expression intense. "I brought you here because you're special. You're connected to something ancient, something powerful. You have a destiny to fulfill." He started chanting in a language I didn't recognize, his voice rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. He pulled a small knife from his pocket and held it up to the moonlight. My blood ran cold. I realized that this wasn't just some quirky date gone wrong. This was something much more sinister. I tried to run, but Julien grabbed my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "You can't leave," he said, his voice now cold and hard. "You're part of this now. You were chosen." He started dragging me towards the altar. I struggled against him, screaming for help, but there was no one around to hear me. He forced me onto the altar and held the knife above me. "Don't be afraid," he said, his eyes filled with a terrifying light. "This is your destiny. This is how you become one with the past." And then everything went black. I woke up hours later, lying on the forest floor alone. The altar was still there, but Julien was gone. I was covered in dirt and leaves, my clothes torn and bloody. I had no idea what had happened, how I had escaped. I stumbled out of the woods and flagged down a passing car. The police investigated, but they found nothing. No sign of Julien, no evidence of a ritual, nothing to corroborate my story. They treated me like I was crazy, like I'd imagined the whole thing. I tried to put it behind me, to move on with my life, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Julien was still out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to finish what he had started. I deleted the dating app, swore off online dating forever. But the scariest part wasn't the ritual, or the knife, or the fear for my life. The scariest part was realizing that Julien knew things about me that I hadn't told him, things that were buried deep in my family history, things that he couldn't have possibly known unless the app itself had somehow betrayed me. Unless Serendipity wasn't just a dating app, but something else entirely. Something designed to connect people with their past, not for love, but for something far more sinister. I still wonder about my great-grandmother, the one who disappeared without a trace. Was she also a victim of this twisted game? Was her disappearance connected to the altar in the woods, to the ancient rituals, to the whispers of the past? I'll never know for sure. But I know one thing. I'll never trust a dating app again. And every time I hear the word serendipity, I get a chill down my spine. The moment I knew something was wrong was when he started calling me Serafina in his sleep. Let me back up a little. My name is Sarah, plain and simple. I'm a librarian, I like cats, and I'm generally not the type to attract a lot of drama. My dating life has always been underwhelming. A series of awkward coffee dates, guys who ghost after 2 texts, and one memorable incident involving a man who brought his mother along to our first and only dinner. So, when I met Daniel, it felt like I'd finally won the lottery. Daniel was everything I thought I wanted. Charming, intelligent, and genuinely interested in what I had to say. He was a musician, a guitarist in a local indie band, which I initially thought was kinda cliché, but he was so earnest about it that I couldn't help but be impressed. He wrote his own songs, poetry really, and even dedicated one to me after our 3rd date. It was all very romantic, very whirlwind, very intense. We met at a farmer's market. I was struggling to carry a comically large watermelon, and he swooped in to help. He had this disarming smile and kind eyes, and he just seemed genuinely good. That first date turned into hours of talking over coffee, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. He would come to the library to visit me during my lunch break, leaving little notes in the books I was shelving. He would serenade me with his guitar in the park, drawing small crowds of amused onlookers. He made me feel seen, appreciated, and dare I say, loved. It was all moving fast, maybe too fast, but I was so caught up in the romance that I didn't want to pump the brakes. After a month of dating, he practically moved into my small apartment. It was cramped, especially with his guitars and amps taking up half the living room. But I didn't mind. I was happy. I thought I was happy. The first few weeks of cohabitation were blissful. We cooked together, watched movies, and spent hours just talking about everything and nothing. He was attentive, always asking about my day, always offering to help with chores. He even started helping me with my cat, Mr. Whiskers, who, despite his initial skepticism, quickly warmed up to Daniel. But then, things started to shift. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible. He became more withdrawn, more preoccupied. He would spend hours in his room, writing music, emerging only for meals or to use the bathroom. He stopped serenading me in the park, stopped leaving notes in the library books. He still asked about my day, but his eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. He was there, but he wasn't really present. I tried to talk to him about it, but he would brush it off, saying he was just stressed about his band, about upcoming gigs, about the pressure to write new material. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on, something he wasn't telling me. Then came the sleep talking. It started with murmurs, unintelligible whispers in the middle of the night. I would wake up, nudge him gently, and he would mumble something incoherent and drift back to sleep. I didn't think much of it at first, just chalked it up to stress. But then the name started appearing. Serafina. He would whisper, sometimes moaning, sometimes sighing. Serafina, I miss you. The first time I heard it, I was startled awake. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and stared at him in the dim moonlight. Daniel, I whispered, shaking him gently. Who's Serafina? He didn't wake up, just mumbled the name again, clearer this time. Serafina, come back to me. I lay back down, my mind racing. Who was Serafina? An old girlfriend? A figment of his imagination? A character in one of his songs? I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more, something significant. The next morning, I confronted him about it. Daniel, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. You were talking in your sleep last night. You kept saying a name, Serafina. Who is she? He looked at me blankly, his brow furrowed. Serafina? I don't know anyone named Serafina. Are you sure you heard me right? I insisted that I had heard him say the name multiple times. He remained adamant that he didn't know anyone by that name. He suggested that I was dreaming, that I had imagined it. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't. The way he said the name, the longing in his voice, it felt too real to be a dream. The sleep talking continued, night after night. Serafina, where are you? Serafina, I am sorry. Serafina, I can't live without you. With each passing night, the name became more ingrained in my mind, more haunting, more terrifying. I started doing some digging. I scoured his social media, looking for any mention of Serafina. I went through his old photos, searching for a face that matched the name. I even asked his bandmates, casually dropping the name into conversation, hoping for a reaction. But no one seemed to know who she was. The more I searched, the more frustrated and paranoid I became. I started to feel like I was losing my mind, like I was trapped in some kind of twisted game. Was he gaslighting me? Was he deliberately trying to drive me crazy? Then one day, I stumbled upon something. I was cleaning his room, something I rarely did, but I was trying to be a good girlfriend, trying to salvage what was left of our relationship. I was dusting his bookshelf when I noticed a small, leather-bound journal tucked away in the corner. It looked old, almost antique. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The journal was filled with handwritten entries, all dated and meticulously organized. The entries were poems, song lyrics, and personal reflections, all written in Daniel's handwriting. As I flipped through the pages, I noticed a recurring theme, a woman named Serafina. The early entries were filled with love and adoration. He wrote about her beauty, her intelligence, her grace. He described their shared dreams, their hopes for the future. He wrote about how she was his soulmate, his everything. But as I continued reading, the tone of the entries began to shift. The love turned to obsession, the adoration to possessiveness. He wrote about his fear of losing her, his jealousy of other men. He wrote about how he would do anything to keep her, even if it meant hurting others. The last entry was dated 5 years ago. It was a confession, a desperate plea for forgiveness. He wrote about how he had made a mistake, a terrible mistake, that had cost him everything. He wrote about how he had lost Serafina, and how he would never be able to forgive himself. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. I finally understood. Serafina wasn't just an old girlfriend. She was something much more sinister. I confronted Daniel again, this time with the journal in my hand. I demanded to know who Serafina was, what had happened between them. He broke down. He confessed everything. Serafina was his ex-girlfriend, his first love. They had been together for years, deeply in love, or so he thought. But Daniel had always been possessive and controlling, and Serafina had grown tired of it. She tried to break up with him, but he wouldn't let her go. One night, they had a fight, a terrible fight. He lost his temper, said things he didn't mean. He didn't say exactly what he did, but he implied that he had hurt her badly. Serafina ran away, and he never saw her again. He had spent the last 5 years searching for her, consumed by guilt and regret. He had convinced himself that if he could just find her, he could make things right. He could win her back. He had even started seeing a therapist, trying to deal with his issues, but nothing seemed to work. Then he met me. He said that when he saw me, he saw a glimmer of Serafina in my eyes. He said that I reminded him of her, that I had the same kind of spirit, the same kind of beauty. He convinced himself that I was his second chance, that he could recreate his relationship with Serafina with me. That's why he moved so fast, why he was so intense, why he called me Serafina in his sleep. He wasn't seeing me. He was seeing her. I was horrified. I couldn't believe that I had been so blind, so naive. I had fallen in love with a man who was still obsessed with his ex-girlfriend, a man who saw me as nothing more than a replacement. I broke up with him that day. I packed his things, threw him out of my apartment, and changed the locks. I never wanted to see him again. But even now, years later, I still think about Serafina. I wonder who she was, what happened to her, whether she's still out there somewhere. And I wonder if Daniel ever found her, if he ever found peace. The moment I knew something was wrong wasn't just the sleep talking. It was the realization that I wasn't being seen for who I was. I was being seen as a ghost, a shadow of someone else's past. And that's a kind of horror that's hard to shake. I met him at a coffee shop. Cliché, I know. He was reading a book I loved, House of Leaves. We struck up a conversation, and I was immediately drawn in. He was handsome, intelligent, and had a quiet intensity that I found captivating. We talked for hours that first day, and I felt a connection I hadn't experienced with anyone before. His name was Silas. He was a writer, or at least he said he was. He didn't have any published work, but he was always working on something, scribbling in notebooks and muttering to himself. He was secretive about his writing, never letting me read any of it, which I found a little odd, but I chalked it up to artistic temperament. Our dates were unconventional. We went to obscure art galleries, watched foreign films in rundown theaters, and explored abandoned buildings at night. He had a fascination with the macabre and the forgotten, which I found both intriguing and slightly unsettling. He always paid for everything. Even if I insisted on paying, he wouldn't let me. It felt a little old-fashioned, but I appreciated the gesture. He bought me flowers every week, usually dark red roses or lilies, which he said symbolized passion and mystery. He was extremely attentive. I thought that he was the one. Things started getting weird about a month into the relationship. I started noticing that he was always watching me, not in a cute, admiring way, but in a way that made me feel like I was being studied. He would stare at me intently during conversations, his eyes unblinking, like he was trying to see inside my soul. He also started asking me strange questions about my past, my fears, my dreams. He wanted to know everything about me, and he seemed particularly interested in my vulnerabilities. At first, I was flattered by his interest, but then it started to feel invasive. One night, we were at his apartment, a small, cluttered space above a bookstore. He had candles lit, and we were listening to old jazz records. He was holding me close, and I felt safe and loved. Then, out of nowhere, he asked me if I had ever killed anyone. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his face was serious. "Have you ever taken a life?" he repeated, his voice low and intense. I was taken aback. "No, of course not," I said, pulling away from him. "What kind of question is that?" He just stared at me for a moment, then shrugged. "Just curious," he said, but the look in his eyes lingered. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I started noticing other strange things. He always seemed to know where I was, even when I hadn't told him. He would show up at my work unexpectedly, or he would call me just as I was thinking about him. It was like he was inside my head. I started having nightmares, vivid, disturbing dreams about being chased through dark forests by a shadowy figure. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, convinced that someone was watching me. I tried to talk to Silas about it, but he dismissed my concerns. He said I was just stressed and that I needed to relax. He suggested we go away for a weekend, just the two of us. I hesitated, but I wanted to believe that everything was okay. I wanted to believe in him. We drove to a secluded cabin in the mountains. It was beautiful, surrounded by tall trees and a clear, rushing stream. There was no cell service, no internet, just us and the wilderness. I should have taken the lack of service as a sign to leave. The first day was idyllic. We hiked through the woods, swam in the stream, and made love by the fire. I felt myself starting to relax, to let go of my fears. But that night, everything changed. We were lying in bed, reading, when I heard a noise outside. A scratching sound, like something was trying to get in. I froze, my heart pounding. What was that? I whispered. Silas just shrugged. "Probably just an animal," he said, but I could see the flicker of something in his eyes. The scratching continued, growing louder and more insistent. I got out of bed and went to the window. I peeked through the curtains and saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing in the woods, just beyond the edge of the clearing, was a figure. It was tall and shadowy, and it seemed to be staring directly at me. I couldn't make out any features, but I could feel its malevolence. I screamed and stumbled back from the window. Silas was sitting up in bed, watching me, his face expressionless. "What is it?" he asked, his voice flat. "There's someone outside," I said, my voice trembling. "Someone is watching us." He didn't say anything. He just got out of bed and walked to the window. He stood there for a moment, looking out into the darkness, then turned back to me. "There's no one there," he said. "You're imagining things." I knew I wasn't imagining it. I had seen the figure. I had felt its presence. But Silas refused to acknowledge it. We went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I lay there, listening to the scratching and the whispers, convinced that something terrible was about to happen. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to find Silas standing over me, holding a knife. The candlelight flickered across his face, making him look like a demon. I had never been so scared in my life. "What are you doing?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. He just stared at me, his eyes filled with a cold, empty light. He raised the knife above his head. I screamed and rolled out of bed. I scrambled to my feet and ran towards the door. He lunged at me, but I managed to dodge him. I threw open the door and ran out into the night. I ran through the woods, stumbling and falling, branches tearing at my skin. I could hear Silas behind me, his footsteps pounding on the ground. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran, driven by fear and adrenaline. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, until my lungs were burning and my legs were screaming. I collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. I looked back, but Silas wasn't there. I was alone in the darkness. I spent the rest of the night huddled under a tree, shivering and terrified. When the sun finally rose, I started walking. I walked for hours until I reached a small town. I found a phone booth and called the police. They took me back to the cabin, but Silas was gone. The cabin was empty, except for the knife lying on the bed. The police launched an investigation, but they couldn't find him. It was like he had vanished into thin air. They looked into his past and found nothing. No criminal record, no known family, no trace of his existence before he met me. It was like he had been created specifically to torment me. I spent months in therapy, trying to process what had happened. I was diagnosed with PTSD. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't trust anyone. I was afraid to go outside, afraid to be alone. I was convinced that Silas was still out there, watching me, waiting for me. It's been 2 years since that night, and I'm still struggling. I still have nightmares, I still jump at shadows, and I still can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I am forever scarred. I may never love again. I don't know who Silas was, or what he wanted from me. I only know that he almost destroyed me. He showed me the darkness that exists in the world, the evil that can hide behind a charming smile. I'm still shaken up from this experience, and I don't know if I'll ever fully recover. But I'm trying. I'm trying to rebuild my life, to find some semblance of normalcy. I'm trying to learn to trust again, but it's hard. So hard. Dating is hard now. I don't want to feel trapped again. I think about him a lot. His intense eyes. His words. I didn't realize I was being charmed by a monster. He wasn't who I thought he was. I trusted him, and look at what happened. The moral of the story is to be careful who you trust, and to trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I didn't listen to my instincts, and I almost paid the ultimate price. The dating app was called Serendipity, which, in retrospect, should have been my first clue that things were about to get weird. I mean, who names a dating app Serendipity, unless they're actively trying to lure in people who are overly romantic and easily swayed by the promise of fate? Which, okay, guilty. I'd been single for about a year after a particularly messy breakup. My friends kept telling me to get back out there, but the thought of swiping through endless profiles filled with generic photos and even more generic bios made me want to crawl under a rock and hibernate. But then I saw an ad for Serendipity. It claimed to match people based on shared cosmic alignments and karmic compatibility. Ridiculous, I know, but something about it appealed to my slightly cynical, slightly hopeful heart. I downloaded the app, filled out the lengthy questionnaire, which included questions about my astrological sign, past lives, and favorite crystal, and waited to see what the universe had in store for me. That's when I matched with Julian. His profile was intriguing. His pictures were all candid shots of him doing interesting things, hiking in the mountains, playing the guitar, volunteering at an animal shelter. His bio was short and sweet, looking for someone to share adventures with. Let's see what the stars have in store. He was attractive, intelligent, and seemingly down to earth. He was basically my dating app unicorn. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about our shared love of travel, our favorite books, and our dreams for the future. He was funny, insightful, and genuinely interested in getting to know me. It felt like we had known each other for years, even though we had just met online. After a week of chatting, we decided to meet in person. He suggested a small, cozy bookstore cafe in my neighborhood. Perfect, I thought. Low-key, romantic, and a place where we could actually talk without having to shout over loud music. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a table by the window, reading a book. He looked even better in person than he did in his pictures. He had this warm, inviting smile that made me feel instantly at ease. The date was amazing. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories. He asked me about my passions, my fears, and my deepest desires. He listened intently, making me feel like I was the most interesting person in the world. It was the kind of date that makes you believe in magic, the kind that makes you feel like you finally found the one. At the end of the night, he walked me home. We stood on my doorstep, lingering in the awkward silence that always precedes the first kiss. He leaned in, and I closed my eyes, ready for that movie moment spark. And then he said something that completely threw me off guard. "I've been waiting for you for a very long time," he whispered, his voice low and intense. Centuries, in fact. I opened my eyes, blinked, and stared at him. "Excuse me." He chuckled, but there was something unsettling about it. "It's a long story, a story that spans lifetimes. But trust me, you'll understand soon." I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off as a joke. "Okay, Shakespeare, maybe you've had a little too much coffee." He didn't laugh. He just stared at me with those intense, knowing eyes. "You'll see," he said softly. "You'll remember." He kissed me then, and it was strange. It wasn't a bad kiss, but it felt off. It was like he was trying to unlock something inside me, like he was searching for something that wasn't there. I went inside, completely bewildered. What was that all about? Was he some kind of delusional weirdo? Or was he just trying to be quirky and romantic? I couldn't decide. I tried to chalk it up to nerves and overthinking. Maybe he was just trying to be mysterious and intriguing. Maybe I was just reading too much into it. But as the days went on, things got weirder. He started talking about things he couldn't possibly know. Details about my childhood, my family, my past relationships. Things I had never told him. "I know you love lilies," he said one day, handing me a bouquet of my favorite flowers. "You always have." "How did you know that?" I asked, genuinely freaked out. He just smiled enigmatically. "I told you. We have a long history together." He started hinting at past lives, claiming that we had been lovers in ancient Egypt, medieval France, and Victorian England. He said we were soulmates, destined to be together across all time. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he had somehow hacked into my social media accounts and found information about me. Maybe he was just a really good guesser. But the things he knew were so specific, so personal, that it seemed impossible. And then there were the dreams. I started having vivid, disturbing dreams about past lives. I saw myself as an Egyptian queen, a French courtesan, an English governess. In each dream, I was deeply in love with Julian, but our love always ended tragically. The dreams were so real, so intense, that I woke up every morning feeling exhausted and disoriented. I started to question my sanity. Was I losing my mind? Was Julian some kind of hypnotist? I tried to talk to my friends about it, but they just dismissed it as a case of love goggles. They said I was just infatuated with him and that I was letting my imagination run wild. But I knew something was wrong. Terribly wrong. One night, Julian took me to an old, abandoned cemetery on the outskirts of town. It was a creepy, desolate place, filled with crumbling tombstones and overgrown weeds. "Why are we here?" I asked, my voice trembling. He led me to a particular grave, a large, ornate tombstone with the name Eleanor etched into the stone. "This is where you're buried," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "In this life, anyway." I stared at the tombstone, my heart pounding in my chest. "What are you talking about?" He turned to me, his eyes filled with a strange, almost manic intensity. "Don't you remember, Eleanor? We were so happy together. But then they took you from me. They accused you of witchcraft and burned you at the stake." I recoiled in horror. "You're insane," I said, backing away from him. He reached out and grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "I won't let them take you again," he said, his voice rising. "This time, we'll be together forever, even if it means—" He trailed off, his eyes darting around the cemetery. "Even if it means what?" I demanded, struggling to free myself from his grasp. He looked back at me, his expression softening. "Even if it means I have to protect you from the darkness that's coming." "What darkness?" He didn't answer. He just pulled me closer and kissed me again. The kiss was more intense than ever, almost suffocating. I felt like he was trying to absorb my soul, to erase my identity and replace it with something else. I finally managed to break free from his grasp. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice shaking. "Stay away from me." I turned and ran, stumbling through the cemetery, desperately trying to escape. I could hear him calling my name, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I ran all the way home, locked myself in my apartment, and didn't come out for days. I blocked Julian's number, deleted him from all my social media accounts, and tried to erase him from my life. But the dreams continued, and the feeling that I was being watched, that I was in danger, never went away. One day, I decided to do some research on a cemetery. I found an old article about a woman named Eleanor who had been accused of witchcraft and burned at the stake in the 17th century. The article mentioned that she had been buried in an unmarked grave in the cemetery. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was all too much to be a coincidence. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just ignore it and hope it would go away. I went to the police and told them everything. They listened to my story, but they were skeptical. They said there was no evidence that Julian had done anything wrong, that it was just a case of a bad breakup. But I knew he was dangerous. I knew he was capable of anything. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I hired a private investigator to look into Julian's background. What he found was disturbing. Julian had a history of stalking and harassing women. He had been arrested several times for violating restraining orders. He had a pattern of becoming obsessed with women who reminded him of someone from his past. The investigator also discovered that Julian had been seeing a therapist for years and that he had been diagnosed with a severe personality disorder. I was terrified. Okay, so, let me tell you about this dating experience I had last year. I swear, I still get shivers thinking about it. I'm usually pretty good at reading people, you know. I can spot a weirdo from a mile away, usually. But this guy was different. He was like a master of disguise, hiding his true colors behind a charming facade. I met him on Bumble. His name was Ethan, and his profile was pretty standard. A few photos of him hiking, one with his dog, and a witty bio about enjoying craft beer and live music. Seemed harmless enough. We matched, and he messaged me almost immediately. The conversation flowed easily. He asked thoughtful questions about my life, my interests, and my goals. He even remembered details I had mentioned in passing, which I found impressive. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, which was a refreshing change from the usual dating app interactions. After a few days of chatting, he asked me out. He suggested a local jazz club, which I loved. It felt like a classic, sophisticated date, and I was excited. I got ready, put on a dress I felt good in, and headed out, feeling optimistic. Ethan was already there when I arrived. He stood up as I approached, smiled warmly, and gave me a hug. He looked even better in person than in his photos. He was tall, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes. He had this way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. The date started off great. The jazz music was fantastic, the drinks were strong, and Ethan kept the conversation flowing. He told me about his job as a software engineer, his passion for photography, and his love for traveling. He seemed intelligent, funny, and genuinely kind. I found myself laughing a lot and feeling comfortable around him. As the night progressed, however, things started to get a little off. It started subtly. He began asking more personal questions, delving deeper into my past relationships and my insecurities. He did it in a way that seemed caring, like he was trying to understand me on a deeper level. But it felt a little too intense for a first date. Then he started making comments about how beautiful I was, how he had never met anyone like me, and how he felt an instant connection between us. Again, it seemed flattering at first, but it quickly became overwhelming. He was laying it on way too thick, and it felt insincere. I tried to steer the conversation towards lighter topics, but he kept bringing it back to us, to our connection, to how perfect we were for each other. He started talking about the future, about traveling together, about meeting his family. It was like he was trying to fast forward our relationship at warp speed. I started to feel uncomfortable. I made an excuse to go to the bathroom, and when I got there, I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself down. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he was just really enthusiastic. But something felt wrong, terribly wrong. When I returned to the table, Ethan was waiting for me, his eyes locked on mine. He reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was surprisingly strong, and his hand was cold and clammy. "I'm so glad you're here," he said, his voice low and intense. "I've been waiting for you my whole life." I tried to smile, but my face felt frozen. I wanted to pull my hand away, but I didn't want to cause a scene. "Ethan," I said, "this is all moving a little fast for me." He chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "Don't be scared," he said. "We're meant to be together. I know it. You know it." He leaned closer, his face inches from mine. I could smell his breath, which smelled faintly of metal. "I can feel it," he whispered. That was it. I was done. I pulled my hand away and stood up. "I have to go," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm not feeling well." He looked surprised, then angry. "What? Where are you going?" he asked, his voice rising. "I told you, I'm not feeling well," I repeated, backing away. "I'm going home." But we were having such a good time," he protested. "I thought you liked me." I need to go," I stammered. I turned and practically ran out of the jazz club, leaving him sitting there alone. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. I started the car and sped away, not even looking back. I drove straight home, locked all the doors, and curled up in bed, shaking and crying. I felt violated, like I had just escaped some kind of trap. The next day, I blocked Ethan on Bumble and tried to forget about the whole experience. But he wouldn't let me. He started calling me. My phone rang nonstop with calls from unknown numbers. I blocked each one, but he kept finding new ways to reach me. Then he started emailing me. Long, rambling emails about how he couldn't live without me, how we were destined to be together, how he knew I was just scared but he would protect me. The emails were increasingly disturbing, filled with obsessive declarations of love and veiled threats. I changed my email address, but he somehow found my new one. I started to feel like I was being stalked. I was afraid to leave my apartment. I jumped at every sound. I felt like I was being watched. One night, I was sitting in my living room, watching TV, when I heard a noise outside my window. I peeked through the curtains and saw someone standing on the sidewalk, staring up at my apartment. It was Ethan. He was just standing there, motionless, his eyes fixed on my window. I screamed and ran to the back of my apartment, locking all the doors and windows. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, Ethan was gone. The police took a report, but they said there wasn't much they could do unless he actually threatened me or broke into my apartment. I felt helpless and terrified. I knew I had to do something. I started researching Ethan online, trying to find out more about him. I discovered that he had a history of stalking and harassment. He had been arrested several times for similar behavior, but he had always managed to avoid serious consequences. I also found out that he had a restraining order against him from a previous girlfriend. I contacted the previous girlfriend, and she confirmed my worst fears. She told me that Ethan was dangerous and that he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. She advised me to take the situation seriously and to do everything I could to protect myself. I took her advice to heart. I filed for a restraining order against Ethan, and I hired a private investigator to track his movements. I also installed a security system in my apartment and started carrying pepper spray with me everywhere I went. The restraining order helped a little. Ethan stopped calling and emailing me, but I knew he was still out there, watching. The private investigator confirmed that he was still living in the area and that he had been seen near my apartment on several occasions. I lived in constant fear, knowing that he could strike at any moment. One evening, I was coming home from work when I noticed that my apartment door was slightly ajar. My heart leaped into my throat. I knew he had been inside. I cautiously pushed the door open and stepped inside, my hand gripping the pepper spray in my pocket. The apartment was dark and silent. I slowly made my way through the living room, my senses on high alert. Suddenly, I heard a noise coming from the bedroom. I crept towards the bedroom door and peeked inside. Ethan was standing in the middle of the room, holding a knife. He turned to face me, his eyes filled with a terrifying rage. "I told you we were meant to be together," he said, his voice cold and menacing. "You can't escape me." I screamed and sprayed him with the pepper spray. He screamed in pain and stumbled backwards, dropping the knife. I didn't hesitate. I ran out of the apartment and screamed for help. Neighbors heard my screams and called the police. Ethan was arrested and charged with stalking, harassment, and attempted assault. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to several years in prison. I was finally safe, but the experience left me scarred. I still have nightmares about Ethan, and I still struggle to trust people. I learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of online dating and the importance of trusting my instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't ignore the red flags, no matter how charming the person may seem. Protect yourself, and don't be afraid to seek help if you feel threatened. It's been a long road to recovery, but I'm slowly learning to heal and move on. I'm still cautious about dating, but I refuse to let one bad experience ruin my life. I'm determined to find happiness and love again, but I'll never forget the horrifying experience with Ethan. It serves as a constant reminder to be careful, to trust my gut, and to never underestimate the power of intuition. I hope my story serves as a warning to others and helps them to stay safe in the often dangerous world of online dating. There's some seriously messed up people out there. I'm glad he is behind bars for the crimes he committed. I am thankful I have been able to move on and find happiness with my current partner. I knew she was the one when I met her. There were no red flags at all.